age 26, MIT graduate. Mission: infiltrate Ibrahim Trayori's digital infrastructure. Jean Carvier, a young software genius working for the French Foreign Intelligence Service, was sent to Burkina Faso. His task was simple: gain control over the new African leader's entire digital system. But something unexpected happened. Africa's poverty, the people's hope, and Traore's sincerity deeply affected this young engineer. When he secretly handed over all the information he had gathered to Traore one night, what awaited him could have been the death penalty. The sleek glass building of Direction Générale de la Sécurité Extérieure, France's foreign intelligence headquarters, stood imposingly against the Parisian skyline. Inside, in a soundproof room, Jean Carvier sat across from his handler, Colonel Maurice Leblanc. "You understand the importance of this mission, Jean?" Leblanc's voice was calm but commanding. "Burkina Faso may seem insignificant, but Traore is becoming dangerously influential. His ideas about resource sovereignty are spreading." Jean nodded confidently. "I've studied their systems. Their digital infrastructure is primitive. I could own their networks within weeks." Leblanc slid a folder across the table. "Your cover is perfect. MIT graduate, digital infrastructure specialist. Traore is desperately trying to modernize his country's systems. You'll be exactly what he's looking for." Jean reviewed his new identity papers. "And my extraction plan?" Leblanc's face hardened. "Standard protocol. But remember, this isn't just about surveillance. We need control. Full access to their military communications, government emails, and especially their new mineral resource database." 3 weeks later, Jean Carvier walked through the dusty streets of Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso's capital. The contrast with Paris was jarring. Unpaved roads, poverty visible at every corner. Yet, there was something else in the air. Hope. People moved with purpose. Street vendors called out enthusiastically. "Traore has given them hope," his local contact explained. "That's what makes him dangerous to your people." Jean remained silent, focusing on the mission ahead. The interview at Burkina Faso's newly formed Digital Transformation Agency was surprisingly rigorous. "Mr. Carvier, why would an MIT graduate choose to work in one of the world's poorest countries?" asked the director, a sharp-eyed woman named Fatima Ouedraogo. Jean delivered his rehearsed answer perfectly. "I believe digital equality is the great leveler of our time. Everyone deserves access to technology's benefits." Fatima studied him carefully before nodding. "President Traore will want to meet you himself. He takes personal interest in our digital sovereignty projects." That evening, in his modest hotel room, Jean established a secure connection back to Paris. "I'm in. Interview successful. Waiting to meet Traore." Colonel Leblanc's reply was immediate. "Good. Remember, we need access to everything. Their new resource management system is priority. The Chinese are already circling with investment offers." Jean acknowledged and closed the connection, looking out at the Ouagadougou night. Something felt different here, not at all what he had been briefed to expect. His first meeting with Ibrahim Trayori was nothing like Jean had anticipated. There was no grand presidential palace, no excessive security. Instead, he was taken to a simple office where Traore, dressed in military fatigues, was working late. "Mr. Carvier," Traore greeted him, standing to shake his hand firmly. "I've reviewed your credentials. Impressive. But tell me, why Burkina Faso? We can't pay you what Western companies would." Jean delivered his prepared line about digital equality. But Traore's penetrating gaze made him feel transparent. "Admirable," Traore finally said. "But here, we need more than ideals. We need results." Traore walked to a map of Burkina Faso hanging on the wall. "This country has been exploited for centuries. Our gold, manganese, and now lithium taken while our people remain poor." He turned to face Jean directly. "Technology is either a tool for our liberation or another form of colonization. Which will it be for us, Mr. Carvier?" The question hung in the air, unexpectedly profound. Jean found himself answering honestly. That depends on who controls it, Mr. President. Traore smiled for the first time. Exactly. You begin tomorrow. As Jean was leaving, Traore added, one more thing, Mr. Carvier. We've had many experts from the West before. They come, they take, they leave. I hope you'll be different. Walking back to his hotel, Jean felt an unfamiliar sensation. Was it guilt? Doubt? He pushed it aside. This was just a mission like any other. Days turned into weeks. Jean was given unprecedented access to Burkina Faso's digital infrastructure. He worked directly under Fatima, helping to build the country's first sovereign digital identity system, secure government communications, and, most importantly, a blockchain-based mineral resource tracking platform. Each night, he dutifully transmitted what he learned back to Paris, providing backdoor access to everything he touched. But with each passing day, something inside him shifted. He saw Traore working tirelessly, often until dawn, not for personal gain, but genuinely for his people. He witnessed children in remote villages accessing educational content for the first time through the digital hubs he helped establish. He saw the resource tracking system bringing transparency to mining operations, ensuring profits finally reached Burkinabé citizens. The narrative he had been given in Paris increasingly felt false. One evening, as he was working late in the ministry, he overheard Traore in a heated phone call. No, Minister Dupont, these terms are unacceptable. Burkina Faso will no longer accept agreements that steal our resources. It was the French Minister of Foreign Affairs on the line. Your digital sovereignty project is concerning our investors. Perhaps reconsider your position, or we might have to reconsider our support. Traore's response was measured but firm. We both know what support has meant historically for countries like mine. Those days are over. After the call, Jean found Traore standing by the window, looking troubled. Difficult negotiations, Mr. President? Jean asked carefully. Traore studied him for a moment. Mr. Carvier, when your country was occupied during World War II, what did the French call those who worked with the occupiers? The question hit Jean like a physical blow. Collaborators, he answered quietly. Traore nodded. And what did they call those who resisted? Heroes, Jean whispered. Traore simply nodded again before leaving the room. That night, Jean couldn't sleep. He accessed the DGSE secure server using his emergency protocols, digging deeper than his mission parameters allowed. What he found shocked him. Operation Eagle's Claw, a comprehensive plan to digitally colonize not just Burkina Faso, but several emerging African nations. Backdoors in infrastructure, surveillance capabilities, and economic intelligence gathering. His mission was just one small part of a massive operation. The next day, he received a message from Colonel LeBlanc. Phase 2 approved. Implement Eagle's Talon. We need complete control before Chinese delegation arrival next week. Eagle's Talon was the most aggressive cyber infiltration protocol, designed to gain complete control over Burkina Faso's digital infrastructure, with the ability to shut down communications, manipulate resource data, and even interfere with military systems. It would effectively make the country's digital sovereignty an illusion. Jean sat in his apartment that evening, facing the greatest moral choice of his life. On his computer screen were two programs. The DGSE's Eagle's Talon protocol, ready for deployment. And next to it, a complete record of everything he had discovered, Operation Eagle's Claw, the conversations between French officials dismissing African sovereignty, the planned economic sabotage if Traore didn't comply. His finger hovered over the keyboard. Years of training told him to follow orders. Something deeper told him otherwise. At midnight, Jean Carvier entered the presidential compound using his security clearance. The guard looked surprised. Mr. Carvier, the president is not here. He's at the hospital visiting wounded soldiers. Jean nodded. I need to leave something on his desk. It's urgent. Alone in Traore's office, Jean placed a small flash drive on the desk with a handwritten note. The truth about Operation Eagle's Claw. I was sent to betray you. I choose not to. Jean Carvier. By dawn, Jean had deleted all traces of his DGSE connections and prepared for the consequences. He knew the protocols. He would be considered a traitor, hunted by his own agency. But sitting in his small apartment as the African sun rose over Ouagadougou, he felt strangely at peace. The knock on his door came sooner than expected. Presidential security forces. This was it. To his surprise, they didn't arrest him. President Traore requests your presence immediately, the security chief said formally. At the presidential office, Jean found not just Traore, but Fatima and several military officers. The flash drive sat on the desk between them. Traore's face was unreadable. Mr. Carvier, or whatever your real name is. Please explain this. Jean took a deep breath and told them everything, his recruitment, his mission, and the larger Operation Eagle's Claw. When he finished, the room was silent. Jean awaited his fate. Execution, imprisonment. Finally, Traore spoke. Why? Why betray your country for ours? Jean looked directly at him. Because what I saw here is the opposite of what I was told. You're not a threat to France. You're a threat to exploitation. There's a difference. Traore studied him for what felt like an eternity before turning to his officers. Leave us. When they were alone, Traore spoke again. You realize I could have you killed as a spy? Jean nodded. I know. Traore walked to the window, looking out at his awakening capital. But then I would be what they say I am. He turned back to Jean. I believe people can change, Mr. Carvier. Even spies, even countries. Eventually, he picked up the flash drive. This information, it's valuable, but more valuable is what we do with it. Jean looked confused. Sir? Traore smiled slightly. I'm offering you a choice. A real choice. Not the illusion your superiors gave you. Help us build true digital sovereignty. Not for me, for the people of Burkina Faso. In Paris, Colonel Leblanc stared at his screen in disbelief. All connections to their Burkina Faso operation had gone dark. Jean Carvier had disappeared. Find him, he ordered. Whatever it takes. But his subordinate looked uncomfortable. Sir, there's something else. A file has been sent to journalists at Le Monde. Operation Eagle's Claw. Everything, and Carvier's testimony. Leblanc's face drained of color. Impossible. Contain this. But it was already too late. 1 week later, Ibrahim Trayori addressed the nation. Beside him stood Jean Carvier. Citizens of Burkina Faso, an attempt was made to compromise our independence, not with guns, but with lines of code. Digital colonization is the new battlefield. He gestured to Jean. This man was sent to enslave us digitally. Instead, he chose truth. Together, we have not only secured our systems, but created a blueprint for digital sovereignty that we will share with every African nation. The international fallout was immediate. France denied everything, calling Jean a disturbed individual with fabricated claims, but the evidence was irrefutable. Other African nations began examining their own digital infrastructure, finding similar backdoors. A movement for digital sovereignty spread across the continent. In European parliaments, uncomfortable questions were raised about modern colonization tactics. 6 months later, Jean Carvier, now officially granted Burkinabé citizenship, sat in a new office in the Ministry of Digital Transformation. On his desk was a framed quote from Traore: "True sovereignty in the 21st century begins with who controls your data." His phone buzzed. A message from Fatima: security alert. French diplomatic delegation arriving tomorrow. They're requesting to reset relations. Jean smiled. The balance of power had shifted, not through violence, but through truth. As Jean walked home through the now familiar streets of Ouagadougou, children recognized him, calling out his name. The local newspaper headline caught his eye: Burkina Faso launches Africa's first sovereign digital currency. The photo showed Traore demonstrating the system to other African leaders. Jean had helped build it. This time, with no backdoors, no hidden surveillance. For the first time in his life, he was using his skills to construct rather than compromise. That evening, as the sun set over Burkina Faso, Jean received a visitor, Ibrahim Trayori himself, without ceremony or security detail. They sat on Jean's small balcony overlooking the city. "You know they will never stop trying," Jean said quietly. Traore nodded. "Of course. Power never surrenders willingly." He looked out at his capital city. "But now we are ready. And more importantly, now we know." Jean followed his gaze across the awakening technological landscape of Ouagadougou. Lights blinking on as darkness fell. "It was worth it," he said. "Whatever comes next, it was worth it." 2 years later, at a UN Digital Rights Conference, Burkina Faso presented its digital sovereignty framework, now adopted by 23 African nations. The presenter wasn't Traore or even Jean. It was Fatima Ouedraogo, now Minister of Digital Transformation. "Africa's resources have been extracted for centuries," she told the gathered world leaders. "But data is the new gold, and this time, we control our minds." In the audience, French representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. In a secure room after the presentation, representatives from across Africa gathered. Jean presented technical specifications for a Pan-African secure communications network. "With this infrastructure," he explained, "African nations can share intelligence, trade data, and coordinate policies without foreign surveillance." A Nigerian minister looked skeptical. "And we should trust you? A former French spy?" It was Traore who answered. "We should trust actions, not backgrounds." Mr. Carvier chose to reveal the truth when hiding it would have been easier. The final scene unfolded in Paris, where protesters gathered outside DGSE headquarters. Signs read, "No more digital colonization" and "Operation Eagle's Claw, never again." Inside, Colonel LeBlanc cleaned out his office, a scapegoat for a failed operation. On his desk, a newspaper showed Ibrahim Trayori shaking hands with the French president, signing a new digital equality accord. In the background of the photo, barely visible but unmistakable, stood Jean Carvier, the man who chose conscience over country, truth over orders, and, in doing so, helped rewrite the relationship between Africa and the powers that had controlled it for centuries. As history would later record, it wasn't armies or economics that finally broke the chains of modern colonialism. It was a single act of moral courage, when one young engineer revealed the mask behind digital assistance and showed that true independence in the modern age begins with who controls your ones and zeros. For Ibrahim Trayori, it confirmed what he had always believed, that even in the darkest systems of power, individual conscience could still prevail. And for Jean Carvier, the spy who chose humanity over nationalism, it was proof that sometimes the greatest patriotism is the courage to say no to your country's darkest impulses. Today, in schools across Africa, children learn about the Carvier moment, when digital sovereignty became not just a technical concept, but a continental movement. And in the halls of Western intelligence agencies, a new question is asked during operative training: what would you do if your mission contradicts your conscience? Because one man's choice reminded the world that behind every system, every operation, every line of code, there remains the human factor. Impossible to program, impossible to predict, and, in the end, impossible to control.